Por si no lo habían notado, Donald Trump realmente no se preocupa por nadie más que por sí mismo. No se preocupa por sus votantes, no se preocupa por los estadounidenses, ni siquiera por su propia base magra. Y eso ha quedado más que claro cuando entra en modo matón. Donald Trump ha vuelto con sus amenazas y con su arrogancia, pero una vez más demuestra que no entiende ni lo más básico de matemáticas. Por lo menos luego de lo que acaba de hacer contra California, que no solo es estúpido, sino que termina perjudicando directamente a los mismos estados que lo han apoyado. Voy a mostrarles toda la información, pero antes quiero que recordemos lo que Trump opina de California desde hace años. Escuchemos.
Tonight, President Trump is renewing his threat to pull federal funding from sanctuary cities.
Yeah, it all comes after an executive order directing federal funding to be cut from those not helping immigration enforcement.
The city of Sacramento joined several others in a lawsuit challenging the withholding of funds.
As California recovers from devastating fires that scorched nearly 100,000 acres and forced thousands from their homes, the president lashed out at California Governor Gavin Newsom and threatened to pull federal funding, tweeting, "Every year it's the same thing, and then he comes to the federal government for monetary help. No more. Get your act together, Governor." And blasted Newsom's forest management. "I told him from the first day we met that he must clean his forest floors." He doubled down on the South Lawn.
The governor doesn't know. He's like a child. He doesn't know what he's doing. Every year it's always California. It's rarely somebody else or someplace else.
Newsom fired back, "You don't believe in climate change. You are excused from this conversation." The president has suggested cleaning the forest floors before, suggesting specifically that they be raked. The president said,
Gotta take care of the floors, the floors of the forests, very important.
Y es que queda claro, ¿no? Trump odia California. Tal vez porque es progresista, tal vez porque es diversa, es rica y poderosa, o tal vez porque le recuerda que nunca va a ser amado por la mayoría del país. Sea cual sea la razón, amigos, su odio lo ha llevado a tomar decisiones impulsivas y completamente ridículas. Lo que acaba de hacer lo demuestra. Según las últimas noticias, de última hora, Trump está preparando la cancelación masiva de fondos federales para California, tal y como lo escuchan. Antes de hablar de esta amenaza, vamos a ver unos datos básicos de lo que parece que él no entiende. Estos son los 10 estados que más dependen del dinero federal en todo el país. ¿Cuáles tenemos? Tenemos a Kentucky, Nuevo México, Virginia Occidental, Virginia, Mississippi, Alabama, Alaska, Luisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas. ¿Se han dado cuenta, no? De esos 10 estados, 8 son estados rojos. ¿De dónde viene gran parte de ese dinero federal? Correcto, amigos, de California. Es decir, Donald Trump está amenazando con cortar fondos a uno de los principales motores económicos del país. El motor que subsidia a muchos de sus votantes en los estados que más lo apoyan. Literalmente, amigos, es dispararse en el pie. Y encima darle el arma a tus enemigos.
President Donald Trump is reportedly preparing to sweep large-scale funding from California, and in response, the governor has floated cutting off billions in California tax dollars from the federal government.
Yeah, this is something. We need to go live right now to KCRA3 Capital correspondent Ashley Zavala in the studio here, tracking this right now. What's going on and what eventually this could mean for all of us?
In Golston, at the moment, we don't know exactly what this large-scale sweep of funding means or what the president plans to cut exactly from California. CNN is reporting the president has directed federal agencies to start identifying grants the administration can withhold from the state. Governor Newsom's Department of Finance tells us the federal government provides California with about $170 billion in grants for a variety of programs. That ranges from school lunches, unemployment benefits, education, transportation, research, and other environmental programs, for example. Governor Newsom posted on X this afternoon, quote, "Californians pay the bills for the federal government. We pay over $80 billion more in taxes than we get back. Maybe it's time to cut that off." After the governor posted this, Newsom's Department of Finance spokesman H.G. Palmer sat down with me for an interview. Here's what Palmer had to say about what's going on. So the governor also tweeted this afternoon in part, we pay over $80 billion more in taxes than we get back. Maybe it's time to cut that off, and then tag the president in this post on X. I mean, is that something that California could logistically do?
I think the governor in his tweet was making a very clear point. This isn't a one-way transaction. We've got nearly 18 million tax return filed in California, as much or many more with the federal government. And because of our wealth, because of our strength, because of our tech-based economy, we contribute mightily to the federal government and the nation's revenue source. So what the governor, I think, was suggesting in this tweet and making it very clear is that you may suggest and talk a tough game about taking away dollars, but if you really want to go down this road, let's have a serious discussion about how much California contributes to the national economy and to the national treasury in terms of the amount of tax dollars that Californians pay to the federal government.
Does the Newsom administration have a sense of what these sweeping federal cuts could entail?
In a word, none. And that's because the only thing that has come from Washington about this so far is a lot of unattributed quotes and statements of intent, but no numbers, no spreadsheets, nothing real that you could actually analyze. So at this point, it's a lot of rhetoric with not a lot to back it up. That's not to say that the administration may not come down later today or in the next few days to put out something that they think, fulfills what they're talking about here. I think this is just, another inning in a very long game that has been going on since the beginning of the year. The governor and elected officials, the Attorney General, among others, have made it very clear that we're not going to back down from our values. If there's a threat to California, we're going to stand up to it.
Now, when I asked Palmer if this could be the beginning of yet another lawsuit between California and the Trump administration, he noted it is Congress, not the president, that has the power to decide how money moves. But this blocked funding could present yet another financial challenge for California, which is already trying to deal with the state budget shortfall in the billions of dollars this year. Lisa, back to you.
Ashley, thanks for following that.
En respuesta a todo esto, Gavin Newsom, gobernador de California, ha lanzado una dosis de realidad con el siguiente clip. Escuchen.
Donald Trump is threatening to defund California, but it's Econ 101. California is a donor state. We provide over $80 billion more in tax revenue to the federal government than the federal government provides to the people of the state of California. We help pay federal bills. So if Donald Trump's going to continue to threaten 40 million Americans that live in California, maybe we should consider withholding those resources.
Y si eso no fuese lo suficiente, CNN también aprovechó para explicarlo de una manera muy sencilla. Escuchen.
On the trans athlete, which we discussed right here last week, this is a high school athlete, and they're trying to punish the entire state over that one student.
Yeah, let's hurt as many as we can. You ever notice nobody hates other Americans more than the Americans who keep boasting about how American they are? California gives our country $80 billion more than it takes back. Is this Donald Trump's way of saying he'd like to see California keep that money and not send it to red states where it can be good welfare cash for everybody else? This is not even legal. Congress owns the purse strings. He can't even do it. It's all a complete distraction. I swear, the only thing this administration hates more than the New Testament is the Constitution.
Y es que, amigos, California no solo es un estado. Hablamos de la cuarta economía más grande del planeta. No de Estados Unidos, del planeta. Así que cuando Trump dice que va a castigar a California, quitándole fondos, en realidad lo que está haciendo es amenazar con perjudicar a todo el país. Especialmente, como hemos visto, a los estados rojos que dependen de lo que California produce y aporta. Y parece no entender algo más, ¿no? Que California, al igual que Florida, es en realidad 5 estados en uno. Diversidad política, económica y social. Y ojo, produce muchísimo más de lo que recibe. Entonces, señor Trump, cuando amenazas con cortar la mano que alimenta a tus propios seguidores, puede que estés cavando tu propia tumba política. Y ojo, amigos, las elecciones de medio término ya están a la vuelta de la esquina. Una vez más demuestra que no gobierna con inteligencia, tampoco con estrategia ni empatía. Gobierna con odio, con impulsos. Y eso, amigos, lo hace cada vez más peligroso, incluso para los suyos. Ahora bien, señores, pasemos un poco a hablar de política exterior. quiero que hablemos de un tema que es profundamente preocupante y es la forma en la cual Trump habla y actúa sobre países como lo es China, Irán y actualmente, y en especial, Rusia. En una entrevista reciente que estuve viendo se tocaron varios temas claves, y es desde la guerra comercial con China, el programa nuclear iraní y por supuesto ¿no? Este conflicto bélico entre Rusia y Ucrania. Adivinen qué, Trump no decepciona con sus ya conocidas salidas de tono, pero bueno, en esta ocasión sus comentarios no son solo polémicos, no son muy peligrosos. Vamos a ver esta noticia para poder entender bien el contexto, ¿no? De por qué es que China, o bueno, en específico Xi Jinping, ahora tiene las riendas luego de que Trump haya disparado antes de apuntar con el tema de los aranceles. Escuchemos.
Joining me now, former Obama White House Deputy National Security Advisor and MSNBC political contributor Ben Rhodes. Welcome back, Ben. It's good to see you. So let's talk about the expectations for Monday. You have U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who said only a conversation between Trump and China's Xi Jinping could solve the differences. So how much do these talks matter? And does China have a fundamental advantage in this trade war?
The talks always matter at the leader level with the Chinese because Xi Jinping is the ultimate decision maker in China. That's normal. These matter even more because on the U.S. side, there are multiple policies happening at once. You've got people like Scott Bessent, who clearly wants to kind of calm the markets down, clearly wants to kind of unwind the trade war that his boss started. But then you've got all kinds of Trump advisors who are spoiling for a fight, who want to escalate things. And so I think what Xi Jinping wants to do, and I think he's been quite firm with Trump, and Trump seems to have a lot of affection for Xi Jinping as a strongman. Xi Jinping wants to say, look, let's just calm this down. You need to rein in your more escalatory, if not crazy, advisors. I also think Xi Jinping, to your question, Alex, is holding a lot of cards here because in addition to the fact that the global markets are being disrupted and that led to a lot of Trump supporters putting pressure on him to unwind these tariffs, China has restricted the export of what are called rare earth materials that they have a massive global monopoly on to the U.S. And U.S. manufacturing can't really work without these inputs from the Chinese. So I think Trump didn't, he shot before he aimed in this trade war. China has a lot of leverage here, and they're trying to use it to just turn the dial back down.
Okay, but good to know. These talks on Monday, they're important. We'll be watching that closely. Let's go on to Iran now, Ben, because the Trump administration has proposed an interim arrangement allowing Iran to continue enriching uranium while a plan is being worked out to block Iran's path to a nuclear weapon. This is according to two sources with knowledge of the matter, as well as two foreign diplomats. Under this proposal, the U.S. will assist building uranium enrichment facilities managed by a consortium of Arab nations, which will provide nuclear fuel to Iran for non-nuclear purposes only. You, Ben, helped craft the Obama administration's Iran deal, which Trump tore up. Is this a viable compromise, and does it buy more time for diplomacy, perhaps?
Yeah, it buys time for diplomacy. Clearly, the Trump people want a deal. They want this kind of off their plate. They don't want the risk of a nuclear-armed Iran or the risk of an Israeli strike on Iran that could start a much wider regional war. The irony of all this, Alex, of course, is that we had a nuclear deal in place. Trump pulled out of it because it was Obama's deal. What the Iranians want is they want to maintain some kind of domestic nuclear program, some kind of domestic enrichment capacity. That means there are centrifuges spinning inside of Iran that are enriching uranium for nuclear purposes. If they can have that capability, you can have a deal. That's what essentially happened in the Obama years. They shipped all their fuel out. They took out a bunch of those centrifuges and put them under storage. There are inspections. If the Trump people can get comfortable with the Iranians having some minimal capability, not for weapons purposes, for medical purposes, other energy purposes, then I think you can get a deal. This is kind of a bridge, and they want to test whether the Iranians will let go of a program entirely if they can kind of get fuel from somewhere else. I don't know that the Iranians will agree to that, which is partially why this is being proposed as an interim step. The Trump people have to come to terms with the fact that their own hardliners are not going to get what they want from the Iranians and get a deal, because Iran is not going to agree to having no nuclear program. So once again, they're kind of buying time for their own internal policy contradictions here. What they've said they want is not what they're going to be able to get, but they, I think, are trying to get to the place where they can say yes to the Iranians.
And you have Vladimir Putin, who told President Trump on their phone call this week he's interested in participating in the Iran negotiations. He says he could help bring the deal to a quick close. Moscow certainly has ties, close ones, with Tehran. Would Putin help negotiations, or would he just complicate matters further?
I mean, he was obviously involved in the last Iran deal, involved Russia and China and the Europeans, and they could be helpful on certain things, like if the Iranians are shipping their nuclear fuel out of the country, which is what they did in the last deal, that you want that fuel out so they don't have fuel to build a bomb. Russia could help ship that fuel out, or Russia could take that onto their soil. They could help in that kind of way. But the reality here, frankly, Alex, is I think Putin is trying to appeal to Trump, leader to leader, look at the kind of ways in which we can cooperate. If you just kind of look the other way and let me do what I'm doing in Ukraine, or if you continue to pressure the Ukrainians to make all the concessions that I want in terms of territory, in terms of their future relationship with the United States. So I don't think the price like what Putin could deliver in this deal is worth it. But Trump, I think, is susceptible to that kind of appeal from Putin. He should be focused on ending the war in Ukraine by putting some pressure on Putin instead of trying to build some larger cooperative agenda. He doesn't need to do that to conclude an Iran deal.
Ben, speaking of that Putin phone call, after it, the White House said an immediate peace deal with Russia and Ukraine isn't going to happen. Trump later compared the two countries to two young children who hate each other and said it might be better to let them fight for a while before pulling them apart. This is after Trump's increasing frustration with Putin on this topic, suggesting that he might pressure him into ending the war. Does the ambivalence of Trump's comment suggest he's not willing to punish Putin? I mean, does he not fundamentally understand Putin's obsession to conquer Ukraine?
He clearly either doesn't understand or doesn't care, Alex. And his description is kind of pointless. He keeps trying to talk about Russia and Ukraine, like he would talk about political adversaries at a campaign rally. This is the real world in which there's a war going on that has, killed or wounded hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people and imperils Ukraine's survival and European security. And the reality is the only person that Trump has meaningfully pressured for the last few months is President Zelensky. He's the one that has had to make concessions to Trump. He's the one that agreed to a 30-day ceasefire, which Putin would not agree to. He's the one who agreed to fly to Istanbul to meet with Putin, which Putin would not do. He's the one who's had to worry about whether the U.S. is going to cut off the support that his nation depends upon. And so, of course, during that period, we saw Russia escalate the war. Before the Ukrainians did that operation in Russia, you saw the largest drone attacks from Russia. You saw missile strikes on Kyiv. You saw the Russians escalate. All Trump's diplomacy has done thus far is actually escalate the war and empower Russia. And so now for him to say, maybe I'm going to walk away, well, if he walks away without providing significant additional military support to Ukraine, walking away is a gift to Vladimir Putin. So for whatever reason, he still continues to basically do exactly what Vladimir Putin would want a U.S. president to be doing.
Always excellent insights, Ben Rhodes. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you.
Bueno amigos, ¿por dónde empezamos? Vamos con lo más alarmante. Trump comparando a Rusia y Ucrania con dos niños que se odian, diciendo que quizás es mejor dejarlos pelear un rato. Eso no es un recreo de primaria, amigos, es una guerra real. Hay muertos, hay familias desplazadas, hay un país que es invadido. Esta visión tan simplista de un conflicto tan complejo, ¿no?, nos demuestra dos cosas. O Trump no entiende la magnitud del problema, o peor aún, no le importa. Y ojo, no es que esto sea nuevo, ¿no? Ya lo hemos visto minimizar crímenes de Putin antes, ¿no? Felicitarlo por ser fuerte y en general comportarse como un fan más que como un líder mundial.
Joining us now is the former U.S. ambassador to Russia in the Obama administration, Michael McFaul. Again, we expect the Russia-Ukraine war to be part of the conversation here, and Germany's new chancellor there in the Oval Office soon. So what are you expecting out, or will you be watching for out of this meeting?
Well, the main thing I'm hoping for is no blowout, just like you said. These are very precarious events in the Trump era. He brings the press in. He likes to hold a press conference in front of leaders, and they've ended disastrously for President Zelensky, for the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. In my mind, those kinds of activities do not serve America's national interest. Making fun of leaders in one of the most sacred places in the United States of America, in the Oval Office, that doesn't do anybody any good. So I hope that the Chancellor of Germany does not have one of those meetings where he gets in some tit for tat with the cameras rolling over a subject like Ukraine, because the Chancellor has a much stronger view of support for Ukraine than his predecessor. I'm very impressed with what he's said about Ukraine and what he's doing for Ukraine. That's a bit at odds with what President Trump wants to do for Ukraine right now.
You know, Germany just recently saying it's going to send more military equipment and weapons, gave the green light for those longer range weapons to be used without restrictions. And this, of course, also a meeting happening after we saw that giant attack by Ukraine deep inside Russia. Now Putin is apparently vowing to retaliate. What does that indicate to you? Was Russia ever really serious about a peace deal?
No, Putin's never been serious about a peace deal. There's been no evidence at all over the last 3.5 years that he really wants to negotiate. And I hope finally President Trump and his administration realizes that their strategy of appeasement, of giving Putin concessions and pressuring Ukraine, hasn't worked. And so I think they need to go to plan B. And I think if you really want to create the permissive conditions for a ceasefire, you have to convince Putin that he can't win in Ukraine. And the way you do that is providing more military assistance to Ukraine and new sanctions against Russia. And I think that would get Vladimir Putin's attention, in addition to this fantastically successful operation that you just mentioned. And I hope that that operation will also help the president to understand who are the winners and losers, who are the strong leaders and weak leaders. That's his language, not mine, right? But he uses it all the time. He keeps calling Putin a strong leader. The footage you're showing right now doesn't look like a strong leader to me. It looks like a pretty weak leader. That he can't protect his bombers deep into Siberia is a sign of weakness, not strength. And the exact opposite about the Ukrainians. These are folks I want on my team. I want these as my partners in terms of defending NATO and defending our national security interests around the world. I hope President Trump finally makes that realization himself.
President Trump did not end the war on day one like he famously declared only he could do. But we have seen the first direct talks between the two warring sides over the last month. These were the first direct talks since the war began. So I know that you'd like to see this administration go further in really kind of pinning down Putin, but how would you characterize President Trump's effectiveness in getting the two sides to come together?
Well, I applauded President Trump when he said he wanted to end the war. Of course, he wasn't going to end it in 24 hours, but his engagement was a positive sign. I even supported, and it's controversial, but the idea of having direct contacts between the United States government and the Russian government. When Secretary Rubio met with Foreign Minister Lavrov in Saudi Arabia, that was a positive sign. You have to talk to them in order to be a mediator. And then third, that the Ukrainians and Russians met, not very long, but they did meet in Istanbul. They've met a couple of times. That's positive, not negative. But just meeting is the means to an end. I think sometimes President Trump gets that mixed.
¿Qué está mal con estas declaraciones, amigos? Está deslegitimando el sufrimiento real del pueblo ucraniano. No son niños peleando. Es un país luchando por una soberanía frente a un régimen que obviamente es autoritario. Envió un mensaje de debilidad a Putin. Si el presidente de Estados Unidos está insinuando que se retiraría o que dejaría de apoyar a Ucrania, yo creo que eso es música para los oídos del Kremlin. Está ignorando el impacto global de todo esto. Esta guerra no solo se trata de Rusia y Ucrania, ¿no? Aunque son los más afectados. Afecta a Europa, a los mercados globales, a la estabilidad democrática. Y encima, si pasamos al tema de Irán, ahora busca volver a negociar con Teherán, justo luego de haber destruido el acuerdo nuclear de Obama. La razón, porque era de Obama, así de simple. Aquí es puro ego político. Ahora están intentando una solución intermedia, ¿no? Que en realidad es un parche, en otras palabras. Irán sigue teniendo capacidad de enriquecimiento. pero supuestamente solo para fines civiles, ¿no? Supuestamente. Todos sabemos que esto no se sostiene si es que no hay confianza. ¿Quién destruye esa confianza? Algunos dirán, Trump busca un enfoque más práctico, menos confrontativo, que intenta reducir riesgos de guerra. Pero yo les pregunto, ¿es práctico legitimar dictadores? ¿Les parece estratégico darle poder a regímenes que no respetan ni el derecho humano ni las normas internacionales? Yo creo que no. La diplomacia no puede construirse sobre la base de caprichos personales, ni alianzas por conveniencia, ¿no? Trump no solo está minimizando conflictos muy graves, sino que está jugando con un fuego diplomático. Este enfoque errático, ¿no? Personalista, contradictorio, termina debilitando a Estados Unidos en el escenario internacional. Y no es lo único, sino que también empeora el tema del empoderamiento, ¿no? De líderes como Putin o los iraníes. Pero bueno, señores, ¿qué opinan ustedes sobre todo esto? ¿Creen que Trump realmente tiene un plan detrás de todo esto? ¿O será que simplemente está improvisando sin medir las consecuencias? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en la caja de comentarios. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Recuerda, como siempre, dale like, compártelo con tus amigos y suscríbete a nuestro canal Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.